Hi, everybody. Welcome to the sixth lesson of Off-Chain Code Beginner Web3. On this lesson, it's actually going to be pretty straightforward. We're just going to be covering arrays. And I actually don't think we're going to be spending all that much time on it because it's going to be something I think you guys will pick up quite quickly. If you guys have not checked out some of the other off-chain areas, you can join us on Telegram or WeChat, WhatsApp, and a whole bunch of other areas. Check out the website too, offchain.social. It's a great way of meeting others who are interested in blockchain, cryptocurrency, and coding in general. So a bit about myself. I've been living in Guangzhou for the past 3.5 years. I work as a software developer in an international bank. I previously have done cryptocurrency exchanges, IoT system integration, and enjoy traveling all around the world. If you want to reach out to me, feel free to check out my links. I've got a website, Twitter, WeChat, pretty much all the other social media you expect, and happy to connect up. And if you want to leave a tip, I have my Ethereum address there for ENS. This course is not designed to make everybody a professional coder, so we're not going to be going into deep depths of programming, nor are we going to be getting into the deep depths of blockchain or smart contracts, but you will get some fundamentals of JavaScript, some fundamentals of how Ethereum Solidity does, and hopefully give you a basis to then be able to explore these topics on your own. So I am not going to spend too much time talking about arrays. I think actually going through the exercises is a much better way than the technical description of what is an array. So let's just jump right on into it. So what is an array? It's just storing data, and it's just one of the built-in objects that we use to be able to store data. You'll find that just about every programming language out there is going to have a notion of an array, and JavaScript is no exception. One way of thinking about it is it's like a list. You can store different types of objects in this list. An object could be a string, it could be an integer, it could even be a custom object that you derive yourself. So an example could be your New Year's resolution list, where you might want to start keeping a journal, take up a falconry class, or learning to juggle. Each one of these objects, in this case, is a string, and you could say that's 1, 2, and 3. Now, for new programmers, one of the hardest things about arrays is actually that we don't start with the number 1. We actually start with the number 0. And there's many reasons from a computer science perspective that we start with 0 instead of 1. And we're going to take a look about what ends up happening as a result of that. So just kind of skipping ahead here, we're going to say, let's look at another example. Could be variables defined called concepts. And instead of just having multiple, a single string being stored, by using this bracket here, we can then say we're going to store multiple different items into concepts. Pretty simple. Let's try it out. So they've given us an example here called const hobbies. And they've, sorry, actually, I think actually we're supposed to reset this. One moment. For some reason, my computer doesn't like to reset. Oh, they just want us to run it. So they have const hobbies, example, test, and hello. And then we're logging out hobbies, and sure enough, example, test, and hello will be printed out, including the bracket. So when you print out an array, JavaScript is going to try to combine it back together and show that this was an array. It's a complex set of objects all combined together. Let's go into the next exercise. So creating an array. So an array literal creates an array by wrapping items in the square bracket. We then can store inside the square bracket multiple individual array elements. You can see it's possible to mix up the element types. For example, in this one, the first element is a string, element example, using quotes. The next element is the number 10, an integer. So we combined a string and an integer. And the final element that they gave as an example is a Boolean of true. So there's no reason that you have to keep it all the same. And we're going to reset this exercise again. Apologies, there's really no way for me to clean up these code examples as we go. Let's go ahead and try the instructions. Declare a variable using const. So we would type in const, name it hobbies, and you can put whatever you want inside your hobbies array. So my hobbies include traveling. I like the violin. I enjoy photography. You can see that I've put spaces in between my brackets. You don't have to. You can put them together. There are coding standards, and certain people are picky about these things, but in this case, it does not matter. Okay, so that's number one. Go ahead and try it yourself. Again, just like we showed before, you can console log that on out. Sure enough, it gets printed out. If we wanted to, if my hobby was the number, I don't know, 23, watch what happens. It does not matter what type of content you put on into these arrays. They can store anything that you wish. Okay, next. So this is the hardest part, in my opinion, is array elements are zero indexed, meaning we start counting from the number 0 instead of what most people would assume, well, don't we always count from the number 1? No. In arrays, we start from 0. So in this case, if we looked at famous sayings, they have a couple here. Fortune favors the brave is one element. The next one is a joke is a very serious thing. And the final one is where there is love, there is life. We would say the first element is index 0. The second element is index 1. And the final one here is index 2. This can be very confusing, and a lot of times, even for experienced programmers, they'll forget this. So let's give it a shot. If we go down to the instructions, it's saying individual elements in arrays can be sorted to variables. They want us to create a variable named list item and set it equal to the first item in the famous sayings array using the square bracket notation. Then we're going to console log print that on out. So they want us to create a variable. So we'll call let list item. They want us to set it equal. So we use the equal sign. And to the first item, this is the hard part. First, don't be confused. Even though it says in English first, which normally would mean 1, we need to remember we're dealing with an array. So we need to 0 index it. So we'll take famous sayings. The first item in an array is 0, not 1. And click run. Now I've only done half the instructions. I forgot to console log it. But apparently it doesn't mind that I forgot to do that. All right, so we'll also do console.log and we'll print out list item so that we complete it. Fortune favors the brave. As you can see, that is the first element in famous sayings. So for the second one, now console log the third element in famous sayings array using bracket notation. Again, third normally in English would be the number 3. That's not how we deal with it in arrays though. So console.log, we want to log it on out. And in this case, they want us to directly do it. So we're just going to take famous sayings. Now, 3 would be the answer you might originally think, but they're saying 1, 2, 3, but again, it's 0 index, so it's 0, 1, 2. The third element is index 2. I swear, they just designed this stuff to confuse us, right? All right, now we're completing it. So remember, when accessing an array, we start from the number 0. So don't be too quick to think, oh, third equals 3. No, if it's an array, we need to remove 1. Awesome. You can now access each element in an array using the index. But what happens if you try to access an index that is beyond the last element? So they purposely want to say, what happens if you go outside it? So try to log the item at index 3. Now, there is no index 3 in famous sayings. There's 0, 1, and 2. So number 3 would be out here. Let's see what happens. Console.log famous sayings at index 3. Run. What you end up getting, oh, I did it wrong. What did I do? I also misspelled it. So we got a new error. So if you misspell the array entirely, it's going to give you a famous sayings is not defined. So that's completely incorrect. Let's try that again. Famous sayings is undefined, which is what they would expect to see. So you are going to get something returned back, and what JavaScript's going to return is undefined. You've now gone outside of the array, and it's undefined. For different programming languages, this will get handled differently. For some more low-level programming languages, you might actually get something completely unexpected. What's end up happening is this is storing information in memory. And if you tell it to read memory outside of the bounds of what you've stored, you may get some very interesting results, things that you may not expect. So be careful when programming. Be mindful of where your array ends and don't go outside of it. JavaScript's actually quite nice in saying you're getting an undefined element, meaning that nothing has been stored there. In other programming languages, it may behave differently or even dangerously. Okay, let's continue. So updating elements. Once you have an array, you can then update or change elements inside of it. Let's give this a shot. So in the example that they gave is you might have the seasons, winter, spring, summer, and fall. If you wanted to change the third season, index 3 season, so 0, 1, 2, 3, fall, some people call fall autumn, and it's perfectly fine to then update at index position 3 what the contents are. So what's going to happen is it's going to switch out fall for autumn. All the other indexes remain unchanged, but just at index 3, as you can see, we're accessing the element at 3 and we're setting it equal to autumn. So you'll end up getting winter, spring, summer, not fall, but autumn. So that's how you access an element at a specific position. And by using the equal sign, you can also update it. So let's give it a shot. We had a grocery list of bread, tomatoes, and milk. And then what they want us to do is change the second element of the array grocery list. So to get the second element grocery list, second element, remember 0, 1. So the second element is index position 1. And they want us to set 1 equal to avocados. There we go. If we click run, congratulations, we successfully updated it. Again, be very careful. Second is very easy to add in as 2, and well, you might forget that it's your index. And next, arrays with let and const. So you may recall that you can declare variables with both let, which allows you to modify it and reassign, or const, which means it's going to be constant and you're not allowed to change it. Variables defined with const keyword cannot be reassigned. However, elements in an array declared with const remain mutable, meaning you can actually change a const. Be careful. Meaning that we can change the contents of a const array, but cannot reassign a new array or a different value. What? Let's try it. We're going to go through some examples here. Let's reset this. Apologies. Below the 2 existing arrays of condiments and utensils, reassign the element in index 0 of condiments to mayo. Log the updated array condiments to the console. All right, let's try this out. So below these 2, we're going to reassign element 0. So condiments, index, whenever you see index, that means it's literally that number they're saying. This is an easy way of saying it. So don't say the first item, just say the index 0. Then it's very clear. Condiment 0, they want us to change the first one, or index 0, ketchup, to be mayo. So we just simply type in mayo. And below this, they want us to log it out. So log the updated so console.log condiments, and that'll print out everything. Now you can see mayo is the first element being displayed. Below the code from step 1, reassign condiments to be a new array that contains a single string of mayo. log the result to the console. Okay, so if they want us to be changing all of condiments, we now need to just type in condiments. And they want us to just completely override everything before and just have it equal to mayo. And below that, they want us to, again, log it out. Sure enough, this original list of condiments has now been completely updated to just mayo. Finally, below the code from the previous step, reassign the last item from the utensils array to spoon. Okay, console.log. Oh, they want us to first do it. So what we'll do is we will say utensils, and they want us to do the last item. Now, there's many different ways to get to the last item. For this one, we're just going to do it the easiest way. So 0, 1, 2, 3. It's the third index. 0, 1, 2, 3. See how we do that? 3, third index. And they want us to set it equal to spoon. And then they want us to log this on out. So we'll console.log utensils on out to the screen. All right, before we move on, let's try playing with this. What happens if we change let to const? Interesting. What you'll see is that when we tried, as you can see, when we had a constant condiments and we tried to update the 0 index from ketchup to mayo, we're now getting assignment to constant variable error. So it's not letting us do it. We change it back to let. Everything's fine again. Makes sense? Hopefully this all is good. If we change this back, let's try const again. You'll see that we're allowed to do it. So you're allowed to update individual elements. The thing you're not allowed to do with a const array is completely replace it with something else. And it's kind of contradictory. Like you thought, if it's constant, why am I allowed to mutate individual elements? It's tricky. Just memorize it for now. We're not going to get into the reasoning behind it. So condiments, again, you can do an individual change, but you cannot do this. Replacing the entire array, it won't even execute anything in this code. In fact, you're seeing it doesn't even do this first thing. It completely errors out before it even executes the entire program. We're not going to get into why. Just accept it as fact that for constant arrays, constant declared arrays, you are able to mutate individual elements. You are not allowed to mutate the entire declaration of the array, like this on line 7. A little tricky, just make sure you're aware of that. Let's move on. So in that previous exercise, they said, update the last element to be something. We're going to take a look at a way of using the length property to, instead of counting every time how many elements are in the array, we can use the length property as a way of finding out how long is my array, and then use that to be able to access the last element. For example, const New Year's resolution, keep a journal, take a falconry class. The length of this array is 2. First element, second element, 0 index, first index. So if we access New Year's resolution, this variable, and we use the property here, which is built in dot length, it will output the number 2. We can use that then to say if I want to access the last element, all I would need to do is take New Year's resolution dot length minus 1 because it's 0 indexed. And that would always access the last element in the New Year's resolutions variable. Even if I add in additional New Year's resolutions to this array, this will always hold true to then be the last element. Best to see it in some examples. So in this instructions, find the length of the objectives array and log it to the console. Console.log objectives.length. 3. That's because we have 1, 2, 3 elements in this array. Before we move on, though, let's play with this a bit. Console.log, if you were to take objectives and you were to accidentally access the 3rd index, you're going to get undefined. But what you could do is objectives.length, which is the number 3, minus 1 to 0 index it, and you will now retrieve the last element. And that's a very useful technique, because if I came in later in my code and I said there is now a 3rd element, which I'm now going to declare as learn to code, you'll see then everything automatically updates itself. I've now added a new element on in. I can do that. Even though it was undefined before, I've now set the 3rd index equal to learn to code, at which point my objectives.length is no longer 3, it is now 4. There's 1, 2, 3, and now 4 elements in my objectives. And my code here to find the last element has automatically been updated. I didn't have to manually go in and update the number of the index. It just calculated it based on the objectives.length minus 1 to get to the 0 index of the array. So 4, the last element is learn to code. Pretty cool. This is a useful technique that you should start to use because you really don't want to be what we call hard coding everything. Instead, you try to make things more flexible to say, we probably expect that arrays may shrink or grow. And if you want to access the last element, it's better to define it as the length minus 1. Next. So in the previous exercise, I showed a way where I added a new element by figuring out what the length was and then setting the next index to be equal to that. The push method is a better way of approaching it. In fact, it pushes onto the array a new item at the very end. So in the example item tracker, you could have item 0, item 1, item 2. You could then push one or multiple new items onto the item tracker by using the push function method. So in this case, once you item tracker console log it out, you're going to see the item 0, item 1, item 2, and then it's going to have appended on item 3 and item 4. This mutates, this push method mutates the item tracker variable with the items that you add. And again, it could be anything. You could add on an integer, you could add on a Boolean, you could add on strings as they've done. It just updates the item tracker with these new items permanently. So it's now permanently stored in item tracker. Let's go ahead and try it on chores. Add 2 elements to the chores array using the push. There's many ways to go about this. One way would be to do chores.push. And you could say, well, hopefully learning to code is not a chore, but maybe we could say, make the bed. And you could do it once and then call it again, push. So we could then say clean room. That's technically correct. But you could simplify it if you're doing it twice to then be a single statement. That is still correct on number 1. Your choice. For number 2, they want us to just print it out to confirm that it was actually done. So console.log chores. And sure enough, they're added on to the list. And it does it in order. It'll never switch the order around when using the push function. It'll always be each item in the index plus then the next few indexes. And next, the pop method. The pop method is another mutable method, meaning it's going to modify your original array, and it's going to remove the last item of an array. This is a pretty common thing that you need to do. You might be going through the list and saying, oh, I'm just knocking off all my chores for the day. I'm going to go in reverse order. I pop. When I pop, it's going to access the last element. It's going to remove it from my array. And in fact, it'll return that item optionally, if you wish, to capture it into a variable. So if I look at this example, const new item tracker, item 0, item 1, item 2, when you call the pop, item 2 is going to pop right on off that array and get stored into this new variable called removed. When you console log the new item tracker on out, you're then going to see item 0 and item 1, not item 2. Item 2 has been popped off and stored into the removed variable and now exists here. The pop function method does not take any arguments. So it always just pops off the last element. There's no way to pop off multiple elements. You have to call it repeatedly to keep popping them off. So let's try taking chores, and they want us to pop off the last one. We can then just simply call pop. Now, if you do it this way, you're not going to see anything back, but it's done. It's technically following exactly what they want. Optionally, you could declare a new variable, const removed, store it here, and you could console log it on out. And you can see exactly what was being popped off, mopping the floor. All right, for the second one, in a line after you call chores.pop, log chores to the console to make sure it worked. All right, well, they don't want us to be saying what was actually removed. They want us to show the chores. So let's run that again. Oops. Did I do it wrong? In a line after you call chores up pop, log chores to the console to make sure it worked. I thought I did. Sometimes I get stuck, or maybe I'm just not seeing it. View the solution. What is it saying? I think my computer's internet maybe just blipped because it seems to be not loading, and the exercise doesn't seem to be running correctly at all. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what I just did, dude, but let's replace it with my solution. Interesting. I think I somehow broke Code Academy, but we'll move on. Nobody saw that. We're continuing on. Next. If you really do get stuck, don't be afraid to look at the solution and get some help on there. Sometimes I have seen the website blips, especially if your internet connection flakes out for a bit. Sometimes things don't get persisted correctly. Next. More array methods. So in addition to pop, we have push, and there's many others that you can read about on the Mozilla Developer Network, or called MDN array documentation. This is a good documentation. Open it up in a new tab. You can take a look at all the different methods that exist on the array. Concatenate, copy within, entries, every, fill. There's so many of them out here. We are only scraping the small surface as to what you can do with an array. Please take a look at some of these, because especially things like array.sort are very useful. A lot of times we do want to sort, and In fact, you may want to sort in a custom way. Take a look at some of these that you can do out here. We're going to go through just a few of them together. So pop and push mutate the array on which they're called. Sometimes, though, we don't want to mutate the original array, and we can use the non-mutating array methods. So it's really important to make sure you know what methods will mutate the original array and what will just simply return something without actually modifying it, like a read-only type action against the array. It's not always clear, so just be aware. So there's many others that you can take a look at, and you can see what's up here. We're going to take a look at a few of them. So use the shift method, which is an interesting one, to remove the first item from the grocery list. And you can read about what the shift method does out here. Let's try it. I'm just going to play with this for a little bit. So we want to remove the first item of the grocery list. So we'll take our grocery list, call the shift method, and then they want us to console log it on out. Console log grocery list. So originally we had orange juice, bananas, coffee beans, etc. Now orange juice is missing. So kind of like the pop method, shift is like a pop, but at the beginning. It actually mutates the original grocery list permanently. And you see orange juice has been removed instead of pop, which would have removed plantains. So if you want to remove the last item, you use pop. If you want to remove the first item, you use shift. Under the code added in step 1, use the unshift method to add popcorn to the beginning of your list. Okay, so this is interesting. We now have a way of adding things to the beginning of the list, unshifting. Clever. So after calling the unshift on grocery list, log the grocery list to the console, and then you may want to delete the console log from the previous step. Well, we'll keep it there. So we're going to do grocery list dot unshift, and this one takes an argument called popcorn. How did I know it takes an argument? Well, you're probably going to want to look at the documentation. If we open unshift on up in the documentation, you're going to see an example, array 1 unshift, and it can take one or multiple different objects. In this case, they're passing in integers, but they could be anything. And unlike where we've put things at the end of our arrays, this allows us to insert them at the beginning, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. So let's take a look now at our example by putting popcorn here, and then we're going to console.log our grocery list. Again, this is a this method mutates the original array. Popcorn has now been appended onto the beginning of the array, popcorn, bananas, coffee beans, etc. This is, I think, some of the hardest parts about learning a programming language. You'll find that these type of methods are not consistent programming language to programming language. This one's very specific to JavaScript, and in other programming languages, you may not have a similar type method. You'll have to go figure out what is the way to do it. But you can see there's many ways to solve this problem of adding on elements onto an array. You're in a hurry, so you decide to ask a friend to help you with your grocery shopping. You want him to pick up bananas, coffee beans, and brown rice. Under the code you added for step 2, use the slice method to provide your friend with a list of those 3 things, just bananas, coffee beans, and brown rice. So if we look here, they're saying, don't go shopping for popcorn, just go shopping for bananas, coffee beans, brown rice. So really just this subset or slice as they're calling it, and then skip the pasta, the coconut oil, and the plantains. So being a lazy programmer, I'm not reading no documentation. I just want to play with this and see what happens. And I think that's a fine way when you're testing things out to kind of learn. Try it out. Grocery list, call the slice method, and it's not really clear what to do. What do we need to pass in here to make this slice? Well, I would guess maybe that I want to skip the first element. So we're going to say skip index 0 and therefore take a slice from position 1. I want bananas. He wants to pick up bananas. So this is index 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the question is, where do I stop slicing? Is it at 4 or at 5? Who knows? Let's just guess. What happens if I put in 5? And the question is slice mutable or not mutable? We don't know yet. Let's find out. If I console.log the grocery list on out, I can see what it looks like during the slice, and I can see what happens after the slice. So what we see is it prints out bananas, coffee beans, brown rice, pasta. One too many. What that should then tell you is we got our first number right. We did start with bananas. That's what they wanted us to do, skip the first one. We don't want to see popcorn. We have successfully skipped popcorn, but we unfortunately sliced too many. We're now picking up pasta, and we did not want there. So as we can see, the slice method requires us to say, specify the index at which you want to start with, and then this is 1, 2, 3, and then say at 4, this is the one that's going to be excluded. Pasta. 0, 1, 2, 3, and then skip at 4. Okay. You could read the documentation and learn that from the beginning. What you'll also see, even though we got it wrong, what's interesting is the slice method is clearly not a mutating method. How do I know that? Well, look at what got console logged here, but then when we did line 10 and we called it again, popcorn has reappeared. So has coconut oil and plantains. So what we're seeing is that the grocery list itself never got changed. It never, when we call the slice, it's just temporarily slicing off what you've asked it to do. But in fact, the original list stays permanent. And this is something you'll have to read up about if you go now to the documentation. The slice method returns a shallow copy. What that's saying is basically that we're not going to mutate the original array. A shallow copy effectively means that we're copying the data and then temporarily modifying it. Only the copy is being modified, not the original array. So this is an important aspect to many different types of methods. Sometimes you're going to get a shallow copy that's not mutating the original. Other times you may actually be modifying the original, and it's very important to know when that's going to happen. All right, number 4. After calling slice on the grocery list, log, okay, we already did that. Log it out one more time. You'll see that it is non-mutating. Yes, we've seen now that this did not mutate the original array. Let's find the index of a particular element in the grocery list using index of. Call .indexOf method on grocery list to find the index of the element pasta. So let's take a look at this. We can count ourselves that the index for pasta is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. The answer should be 4. Of course, we have a machine. We can use programming. We can automatically figure out what that index is using code. So we can now say, if you want to print it out, we're going to console log the grocery list, call the index of method, and then pass in, what are you looking for? I'm looking for pasta. Now, it appears I didn't read the instructions. They want us to actually save that to a variable named pasta index. Well, fine. We'll copy that on out. We'll define a new const variable called pasta index and paste it here. At which point we can then print it on out as they've requested. So again, our grocery list has a built-in method called index of, which can take an argument of the thing you're looking for. If it finds it, it's then going to save it back into this variable, which we're now going to print out. The number 4 is correct. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's play around with this. What if I search for my name? What's it going to find? -1. Interesting. What we're seeing here is that if you try to look for something that does not exist, you're going to get almost like an error code back here. This -1 says it's not in the list at all. And if you were to type in pasta in all uppercase letters, it's not the same. This is a case-sensitive type search. It's literally going to look for exactly what you say. And if you don't have it exactly matching, including case sensitivity, it will not find it. And it can search for anything. You could also try to have it search for booleans or integers or anything else that may exist in this list. And should it exist, it will find that item. Play around with this. I think that's a very useful thing. It's allowing us to search arrays. All right. Arrays and functions. All right, now we're combining it all together. Throughout the lesson, we went over arrays being mutable or changeable. Well, what happens if we try to change an array inside a function? Does the array keep the change after the function call, or is it scoped? Yes, we have to keep remembering the word scope to inside the function. Hopefully, people can guess what it's going to do. This is really now combining all of the things we're starting to learn: arrays, scope, and function. And as we've learned in the past, when we use scope inside of a function, it should stay inside. Let's see. Please take a look at the following example where we call push on an array inside of a function. Recall the push method does mutate or changes an array. So they have flowers: peony, daffodil, marigold. We've now defined a new function called addFlower, which takes an object array as one of the arguments. Inside the function, we now take the array that's been passed in and we're pushing on the word lily. When we use this new function, addFlower with flowers, what you're going to get out, if we console log the flowers, is peony, daffodil, marigold, and lily has now been appended on. Why? Because we passed in the flowers into the array. The flowers then was modified. And even though we pushed it inside, the scope was inside, we're modifying the flowers that was passed on in. Therefore, that reference is going to be held and it will be appended permanently onto the flowers array. This is getting complicated. It is called passing by reference. When you pass in the flowers, even though you're doing things local in scope, you've passed a reference to the original flowers, and it is going to modify the original flowers. Even though the scope is local to the function, the reference that you've defined is global, and therefore it will be updated globally. Be careful. This is where, again, I said scope is somewhat tricky. This is one of the tricky parts. You may not realize that when you pass something on into a function that you're not just modifying it locally, that global value is now being referenced and it will be updated permanently in memory. Let's try this on out. In main.js, there's an object called concept. There is also a function called change array function, which takes an array. That will be assigned the element in index 3. So it always takes array at index 3 and setting it equal to mutated. The function change array was called with an argument of concept. You can see that they've passed in concept. Underneath the function called concept, check if it actually mutates it. Well, that's pretty simple. Console.log, and we're just going to take concept and print it on out. Sure enough, even though we had a constant array, remember, const only means the declaration is constant, but we can still actually change things. 0, 1, 2, 3, the third index of the concept constant array was mutated lowercase, And yet, when we call on line 7, our function, we can actually modify the global variable at a global scope inside this local scope to be an uppercase mutated, even though it's constant. It's a little confusing. Like, what is constant? What is actually mutatable? What's not mutatable? This combines all these concepts together, and it may not always be clear at first what is mutatable and what's not mutatable. So are we allowed to do this? What happens if I wanted to, in addition to changing the third object to mutated, can I also change it to new? Am I allowed to do that? So arrays can be mutated, and this is getting really confusing. You can take element 3 and change it to be mutated. And if you then change the array, which you've passed in by reference, to a new array, what you're going to get back out does not contain the word new at all. It's like disappeared. What the heck just happened? I definitely set my array to new, but you did so at a local scope to this function. So as soon as the function ends, it's no longer going to be present. Yes, you modified the reference of mutated, and that got stored back on out. But you can technically declare this again inside that scope function, and when that function ends, it'll disappear. Watch what happens. If I console.log ARR here, watch what we see. So sure enough, temporarily, ARR did equal just new. And then the function ended. And then because this was locally scoped, it no longer exists in the global scope. When we get back to line 10, we're back to whatever the concept array contains, which now does contain the mutated, and there's nothing to be seen about this new. Again, it sometimes will make your head spin a bit until you play around with it, and I encourage you to kind of ask these kind of crazy questions to see what happens. Until you've seen it, it is sometimes hard to believe what it's going to go do. All right, let's double check what happens if we mutate an array using a built-in method inside of a function. So under the console.log statement, define another function named removeElement that takes a parameter of new array, and inside this function call the pop method on the new array. Okay, so we'll now declare const removeElement takes an argument of new ARR. You can see I'm using the more concise notation. There are many ways of declaring a function. This was one of the other ways. Const removeElement, which takes an argument new array. And inside of this, we're now going to use the pop method. So we're going to take our new ARR, this is the thing that we're passing it on in, and call pop. Okay. Let's run that. Great. That is a valid function that will pop anything that's passed on in. We can then call that in this next exercise. So call removeElement. So let's use removeElement that allows us to be able to call it with an argument of concept. The argument of concept is the array. As we just saw, we should be seeing arrays can be, and then since we've already called up here on line 7, the change array, it should then show uppercase mutated. Well, when we then get down to line 14, where we remove the element, it should then pop the last one on off. Arrays can be mutated, pop. After calling removeElement concept, check the value of concept by logging it to the console. So we've not seen this actually being removed. Let's now console.log it. And we would expect mutated to what? Disappear. because we popped it off. So originally we had it change from lowercase to uppercase using the method on line 7. Then by calling the method, or sorry, the function on line 14, we've now popped it off and it has disappeared. And again, to drive home the point, if you declare something here where you're reassigning new array to something else, it does not matter. Because you had a constant, you're no longer modifying the same global variable. You're modifying a copy of that, and it's scoped just to this one function. And as soon as the function ends, it has successfully popped it off. But as we can see on line 16, it no longer references the word new. Little confusing. Be careful. Okay. And coming to the end here, nested arrays. Nested arrays are kind of like arrays within arrays. So arrays can store anything. So can an array store an array? Sure can. And it's actually quite useful. When we think about what an array is, we can kind of think of it as like a list. We think, 1, 2, 3, this is an array of, 3 objects. Well, what happens if I wanted to store some information about like a rectangle? Well, that would be like just, here are the points of the rectangle. I could say they exist at these Cartesian coordinates. So it's very useful in many cases to have nested arrays to be able to store multi-dimensional type data. I'm not going to get too much into that today, but there are reasons why we need nested arrays, especially when we get to storing coordinates. All right, so in their example, if you had a nested array, you can have nested arrays of different sizes. So in this case, I have an array. As you can see, the first bracket and the last bracket defines it is an array. And then if we look at the elements, the first element, or index 0, is an array with a single integer in it, 1. The second element, or index 1 of our array, has another array, because we can see the brackets here, bracket here, and bracket here. This array has of length 2, and the contents are 2 and 3. So if we print out our nested array, and we ask only for index 1, again, not this one, index 1 is over here, what you will get is 2 and 3. So again, to call an element, an index, you just have to pass it on in. And in fact, as they show in the next example, if you wanted to, you can access multiple elements of the array, of a nested array. So if you're asking for the first element, if you're asking for index 1, you're going to get 2, 3. And if you only want to access the number 2, you would have to say, I want index 1 at index 0, because this 2 is at index 0 of this index 1 in this bigger array. Let's try it out. Let's make a nested array. Create a variable, let number clusters, and assign it an array with 3 array elements. Okay, so we know we have an array, so therefore we can use bracket, bracket. Now the 3 array elements are going to be the first array element, meaning index 0, are going to be another array, which contains 1 and 2. All right, that's our first one. So we end this square bracket. And to get to the next array element, we're now on this one, we're going to need another comma, saying here's our next array. And it also wants another array element. So we're going to put in another set of boxes. The second array element should hold the elements 3 and 4, and the array. And the third array element is going to contain 5 and 6. All right. Spaces don't matter here, but I'm going to put some spaces to make it easier to read. So if we run that, we're not going to see anything because we've not console logged it out. But we do, in fact, have an array with 3 elements, each containing an array, and each of those arrays containing some integers. It did not matter what the numbers were. They were just following the exercise. Awesome. You made a nested array. Woohoo. Now declare a variable named target using the const keyword and assign it to access element 6 inside number clusters. All right, what? So they want us to make a new variable using the const keyword. All right, well, that's always const and target. But here's the hard part. They want us to access the element, not index, but element, meaning go find where it says the number 6. That's the element 6. Element 6 is here. How do I find it? Well, it's part of the number clusters variable. We got that much, but where? It's not in index 0. It's not in index 1. It's in index 2. This array here does contain the element 6. So the first thing we're going to do is to say it's in index 2, 0, 1, 2. But to just get the 6, we have to not get the 5. So again, 5 in this array element is of index 0. 6 is of index 1. And if we want to, console.log that target on out. 6 is what we've just retrieved. I hope that makes sense. It is a bit confusing, especially when we get into nested. So we always start from big. The first element that we're retrieving is 0, 1, 2 of the big array. You can optionally, if you want to then specify other numbers inside of here, get into the sub elements inside those nested arrays. And therefore, we've retrieved the 6 by getting the index 1 of that second element. And this works, again, if you wanted to have different sizes, it's totally fine. In fact, you can mix and match. You could have nested of nested. You could have inside here 7, 8, and 9 for whatever crazy reason. And if you wanted to access element 9, you would say this is the 0, 1, 2. And to get to 9, you'd have to go 0, 1, 2. Again, 9. Play around with this. It's a little confusing for sure. But there's a lot of possibilities on what you can do with nested arrays, especially when it comes to a lot of times when we get into more like games. When you think about how do we render different types of things in a coordinate, like a tic-tac-toe board or a chess board, or even getting into more complicated first-person shooters, these are a lot of times using arrays and types of arithmetic to be able to calculate where things are in relation to each other. And finally, reviewing arrays. Arrays are critical. When you get into actual software development, you're going to be using arrays almost all the time. So there's really no reason that you shouldn't take a look, especially at some of this documentation. We've only covered a glimpse of some of these methods. There's so many others out here because a lot of what we do in programming is working with complex objects, and arrays allows us to be able to manipulate them very easily. So take a look at some of these if you have some spare time. But once you've done this, you're going to learn quite a bit. And play around with this. You can see some of this is not always straightforward. Okay, that is it for today. I will go ahead and end the call, but thanks, and I'll answer some more questions after the session here.